Hi, loves. Thank you for joining us on a new episode of the AW Confidential Podcast. I'm honored to sit down today with a man whose life redefines the word unstoppable. Anthony Robles is a NCAA wrestling champion, author, and motivational powerhouse. Proof that limits are only real if we let them be. His true story inspired the film Unstoppable. If you haven't watched it, please go watch it. It's incredible. The film stars Jharrel, Jerome, and Jennifer Lopez, and it reminds the world really that greatness isn't about what you're born with, it's about what you build. Anthony, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
I had to put that in a nutshell, but you're an amazing human. I'm a fan. I'm a fan for
Honored.
sure.
I'm honored. Thank you.
So, thank you for spending this time with us. I know you've been busy after the film. You have inspired millions by pushing past the limits others placed on you. What has been the driving force behind that unstoppable drive?
Well, I'd say it started with my mom first and foremost. I was born missing my leg, and pretty much immediately the world saw me for what I didn't have, or they thought about what I wouldn't be able to do. But my mom, she chose to not allow me to think with that same mentality. She always told me, "You do the best of what you have." And so growing up, I knew I was missing a leg, but it was never a factor to me where I said, I can't do something, or I don't know if I can do it. It was always a matter of just asking myself, how can I accomplish this? How can I do that? So it started with my mom, just putting that in my head that I can do anything I set my mind to. But then along the way, I think it was a mixture of not only reaching my goals, but also a mixture of wanting to prove people wrong. Of all the people who doubted me, who tried to put this low ceiling on me, I wanted to show them like, no, I set my limitation. I define what I'm capable of. So
I love
sometimes in life,
that.
you got to use that negativity and, the doubt of others as motivation when it pops
A
up.
100%. And I'm glad you mentioned that. We tend to focus on what we're born without, or we sort of think about everything from a mindset of lack.
Mhm.
So I'm gonna flip the script because you seem to be very good at this. What inner strength were you born with that most people never see?
That's a good question. I'd say inner strength. Determination, the ability to uh, break down my problems piece by piece. I think just going through my life, I've always just been able to focus on one thing at a time, what's right in front of me. And that's helped me throughout my life. It's never about, everyone wants the end result, right? Everyone wants to reach the prize at the end of the tunnel or whatever. But, you just got to focus on where you are, just that one step in front of you. If you do that, if you can take one step, you celebrate that. So I think that's something that I've always been able to do mentally is just celebrate my little victories. I tell people,
That's hard, but that's hard to do.
oh, it
Because
definitely.
I know for myself, I'm always, I have one win, right? Or I locked on one big interview. I'm already, before I sit down with you, I'm already thinking about, okay, what else can I do? And I
Mhm.
think we all do that. We're always chasing that big win.
Absolutely. I think that's normal. But what I tell people is I'm happy, but I'm never satisfied. I'm looking.
Ooh, you should put that on a t-shirt. That's good. That's good. I like
Thank
that.
you. You know, it,
Okay.
it's okay to, to be chasing after that next thing or to be chasing after that prize at the end of the tunnel. But, along the way, just make sure that you acknowledge how far you've already come, those little things that you've been able to accomplish. And that's not easy to do, but when you force yourself to do that, that gives you that extra energy to keep moving forward. When I was competing in college, there was ups and downs in my wrestling career. I wish I was a five-time or four-time national champ, but I was a one-timer, So during that time from when I started wrestling to the very end, in between, I was celebrating those little victories. Okay, I'm telling myself, I'm not there yet, but I'm getting better here. I'm doing this right. I'm improving here. Just giving myself that extra confidence, knowing, okay, I'm making progress, and the thing is, you can never control the pace of the progress. You just have to be comfortable knowing that you're making progress and have faith knowing that I'll get there eventually if I stick to this, if I'm consistent.
Now, and thank you for sharing that. I'm gonna try to practice that, but um what is there a weakness? Because we all have them. And
Mhm.
for you, it's not physical because people might look at you and say, "Oh, he's missing a leg," but that to me, that's your superpower. What would you consider a weakness that you have that we might not know?
Ooh, a weakness.
We all
Uh,
have them. We're human.
that's where we all have them. That's true. I'd say, for me, I would say it's being willing to ask for help. You know,
Good
I
one.
I think that that's something I still struggle with, which, you know, kind of big picture when I look back at my life, and I share this during my motivational speeches all the time. I talk about the people who helped me along the way, which, but for me, it's always been the struggle of asking for help because I always feel like I need to know all the answers, right? I need to be good enough on my own. If I lean on somebody else, then I'm weak. So that's something I've struggled with going through, but I've been fortunate to where I believe in a higher power, and I believe God placed people in my life to help me break through that stubbornness. And I'm here to help you. I'm going to be here when you're ready to ask for that help. But I think that's a weakness that we all kind of deal with at times. And what I say
Yeah.
is life is a lot like a wrestling match. Yeah, you're out there, and you sometimes you got to wrestle on your own against the challenge, but you can't forget about the coaches in
In
your
the
corner.
tribe.
Those people that are cheering for your tribe. So it's okay to ask for help. And that's something.
And
Yeah.
And you're not alone in this. I was having this conversation with my best friend over the weekends actually, and I was owning, the fact that I know that sometimes I seem or I may be perceived as tough, and it's just like I don't it's really hard to ask for help. And
Mhm.
I want to, and I was explaining to her, I want to be better at that. She's like, yeah, you always make it seem like you don't need anyone. And you do that in relationships and you do that in your professional life. And that's not always a good thing.
Yeah.
So I completely know where you're coming from. And I think in relationships, it's even harder when you're like that because the vulnerability, that's where the humanity is. And you have to be able to sort of, crack that heart open and say, okay, I need help because we all do.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely right. That's one thing about my relationship with my wife. I've learned that it's like I got to be open. I got to be willing to bend. I got to be vulnerable. And what phrase we use in wrestling, we'd say you got to be coachable. It's like you can't have all the answers. If you go in thinking, oh, I got it all. I know it all. There's no room for improvement. Then congratulations, go home. You got nothing else to do.
Yeah.
And
It's
so
that work. You got to
it's
keep work 100%.
just keeping that work
So,
in progress.
and it never stops, by the way.
Mhm.
So every champion has a beginning. What was the first moment that you knew you weren't just going to survive, you were going to win? Because you're thriving, and it's really beautiful to see that you continue to do that. When did you know?
Well, I'd say, I started wrestling when I was 14. I placed sixth in the state of Arizona my sophomore year of high school. But I remember, being in the stands, watching one of my teammates who was my best friend, who helped me train all summer long. He was wrestling for a state title that night. So I'm in the stands cheering for him. I'm watching him win. I'm watching him on the podium. That was the moment for me because I was thinking to myself, you know what? Like I'm showing up every single day. I'm putting in the work just like he is. I want to be on that podium. I can be on that podium. And that was my goal from there on out to be the best. It wasn't just to be alongside everybody else. I wanted to dominate in my sport. And then my next year as a junior, I won my first state title. So I started seeing the progress. It started to pay off and come together.
It's funny that you say that because I was about to ask you. It seems that wrestling for you is more than a sport. It's personal. What does stepping onto the mat symbolize for you, especially during those early years?
Well, what I loved about wrestling, I loved the one-on-one aspect of it first and foremost. I loved how tough it was, but how you're out there and you gotta do the best of what you have. So in a lot of ways, the sport echoed what my mom taught me in life. Off the mat, and also, I think just growing up and going through certain frustrations with life, with family situations, wrestling was a positive outlet for me to kind of get out some of the frustration inside of me. To
Mm.
kind of channel it in a good way, but also. when I thought about it, wrestling gave me a platform to really control the narrative of my life. I could really force people to focus on what I wanted them to focus on, what I had, not what I didn't have. So if I could show that in the toughest sport out there, then I could prove people wrong in a way that would help inspire people. But for me, it was a mixture of things that I think it just kind of helped me to find my identity, and be comfortable in who I was and how I was made.
It's interesting that you say that because, you have this narrative and you've used your gift, you've turned it into like this superpower. And it's almost like that awakens your purpose. Would you say that? Because
Mhm.
it goes far beyond the wrestling.
Mhm. You're absolutely right. And for me, going through that journey, when I got introduced to wrestling, it's like, this is it. This is what I've been waiting for. But then as I started going through that journey, as I started to wrestle and come out the other side of it, I realized that was just a piece of the puzzle. It was a much bigger picture. And, it was to use that platform that wrestling first started me off with to inspire people, to motivate people to overcome challenges in their lives. So, it's just funny
Mhm.
how life works, how things kind of to unfold if you're willing to take that next step in front of you.
Ah, that's awesome. So, resilience is something that we can all tap into. We all have it. We have to cultivate it.
Mhm.
And the blows that life can give us are they're challenging and they're hard and they're painful. But in real life, like this stuff is messy.
Mhm.
So, what's one moment you had to fight mentally, not physically, to stay in the game?
Yeah, I would say there was a moment. I was actually in college, when I my junior season, I lost at the national tournament, and that moment for me was like the ultimate breaking point. I just because I had put so much into the sport, I had so much going on negatively in my personal life with my former stepfather, and the situation with getting close to losing our house. uh, I I pretty much just gave up on everything, But what helped me to get through that, it was actually that stack of letters. That was really something that really happened. I got a stack of letters from a group of third graders that they wrote me as their hero of the week. They inspired me and they pulled me through. And again, leaning on others for help, leaning on others for motivation at times. They did that for me. They motivated me and inspired me to wrestle for a bigger cause, to see the bigger picture. And so for me mentally,
Don't make me cry again. I remember that actually. That was powerful.
oh
I'm
yeah,
glad it was included. It was powerful.
yeah, I still got those letters in the other room in my
Oh.
trophy case. So
Do
that
you do you go back and read them at all?
on occasion I do,
Yeah.
especially when we were filming, to pull those out and be able to show our director, that manila envelope with all those letters. It was something special.
Oh, it's awesome. So here on the podcast, we're all about truth. And thank you for sharing your truth with me and our community. So here's yours. What's one hard truth you had to accept on your journey, and how did it change you?
Hmm. You know, I think a hard truth I had to accept is, you know, doesn't matter who you are or what you do, or how good you are at what you do. There's always going to be someone negative out there. Not everyone's going to accept you. Not everyone's going to be, show you love. I dealt with that for a long time with my former stepfather, trying to win his approval, trying to make him proud of me. I dealt with that for my life for the longest time, just trying to prove people wrong or trying to show them that they're wrong about me. But then even when I got to the top, it was like they're trying to tear me down because it's unfair for everybody else. They're always find something negative out there. So, that was a hard truth is, the sooner you accept that, the sooner you can control the narrative of your life and take power. It's okay. You be you, be proud of who you are, do the best of what you have, surround yourself with people that love you. And, the negative out there, the naysayers out there, the doubters out there, don't allow that to pull you down. Don't allow that, I need to win the approval of people. I need to win the love of them. It doesn't matter, because there's always going to be someone out there that just, you know, unfortunately tries to be negative. So don't give them your power. I had to learn that.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Anthony, thank you for reminding us that purpose isn't handed to us. It's earned, fought for, and lived out loud. You're more than a champion, you're a catalyst. And to my AW community, remember the world underestimates you. That's your cue to rise and even build higher and speak louder. Use your voice. Keep walking in your truth, keep wrestling with purpose, and keep showing them what unstoppable really looks like. And thank you so much for sharing your story. Can you please make sure to tell us how we find you, how we learn more about you? Guys, please go watch Unstoppable, one of my favorite movies.
Oh, thank you. To check out me, like you said, check out Unstoppable on Amazon Prime. It's now streaming. My website's my name. It's anthonyrobles.com, or Instagram. I'm at arobles125. So
And you
feel
have a book.
I do. My book is called Unstoppable. That's available on Amazon as well.
Awesome. Anthony, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your story and being with us today. I appreciate you.
Well, thank you
And
for the
thank,
opportunity.
of course, and thank you, loves, for joining us on this unstoppable episode of AW Confidential Podcast. Talk to you soon.